Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Delusion on the Trunk Monkeys 2 channel. Myself, Jody, and my wonderful co-host, Chad, will be hosting this event.
How's it going, everybody?
Say hello, Chad.
It's good to be back.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be back. Sorry I've been out for a few weeks. I've been in the process of moving and trying to get settled, get internet set up, all that good stuff. So it's taken me a few weeks, but I think I'm well on my way now.
Right on. Very happy to hear that, Chad. Very happy to hear that. Okay, well, I'm going to continue reading the book Delusion, and we're going to start, I'm going to continue reading the book Fruit from a Poisonous Tree by Melvin Stamper, JD. I'm going to start reading chapter 2. Here we go. The title of this chapter is Magicians. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. They lived in a land of shadows, and now the light is shining on them. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2. While researching my first book, High Priests of Treason, I discovered some of the most fascinating information anyone could ever hope to uncover about money, finance, and government. I will share it with you so that you have a better understanding of the issues you will be reading about and possibly facing in the near future. This knowledge could be obtained without years of research. I have saved you the trouble of traveling that same 40 miles of bad road. I do, however, advise any that wish to challenge this evil empire, as I have to verify sites and information that I supply. Get educated on the facts before you act, and then act. My investigation concentrated on the judiciary, Internal Revenue Service, Federal Bank Incorporated, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, offices of the Secretary of Treasury and State, as well as the President and the Congress. That investigation has disclosed, in my mind, a broad, premeditated conspiracy by the international bankers and their agents in the United States government to defraud and enslave the citizens of the United States of America since 1900. And United is lower caps. It is not sentence case or all uppercase. Examination into the statutes at large, United States Code, Code of Federal Regulations, Congressional Record, Federal Register, the Internal Revenue Manuals, and other sources too numerous to mention, reveal a conspiracy of such magnitude that I do not have the words to adequately describe the betrayal of the American people. This is why I repudiated my citizenship with the corporate government of the United States, its demonic masters, and their tool on earth, the United Nations, controlled by the international banking families. These families would slit their children's throat for $1, and they dearly love their children. What I uncovered has clearly been designed to circumvent the intent and restrictions of the Constitution for the United States of America. And again, United is lowercase. By the de facto government in operation today. I'm convinced that their purpose was to implement the Communist Manifesto within the 50 states and enslave us all. If you take the time to read that manifesto, you will discover that its principles are enshrined in our federal and state statutes. Engels and Marx espoused that to create a classless society, a graduated income tax should be used as the weapon to destroy the middle class of a country. Such a system is in place, managed by the U.S. version of the KGB, the ever-benevolent Internal Revenue Service, which is not even a part of the government. For the proof, refer to Diversified Metal Products versus Tebow Trust Company, IRS, and Steve Morgan within the United States Answers and Claim at paragraph 4, quote, denies that the Internal Revenue Service is an agency of the United States government, etc., unquote. Signed by Richard R. Ward, U.S. Department of Justice, U.S. District Court, District of Idaho. Illusion. Description. Quick hands. Sophistry. And
yes, sophistry.
And obfuscation all constitute the art of magic. Those who practice an illusion are called magicians, or, in the less poetic sense, politicians. Now you see me, now you don't. The Congress and the IRS are full of magicians who have created their web of deceit and illusion in the tax laws, not by quick hands, but by illusory language. Have you ever questioned why your Christian name is spelled in all capital letters when we all know that English grammar requires a spelling of all proper nouns in upper and lower case letters? I can assure you that it's not for clarity. Does the word, quote, person, unquote, in statutory law mean the same as in everyday language usage? You are about to discover the answers to both of those questions. In the beginning of the 20th century, when all the courts still had truly honorable judges, they ruled some of those early tax laws unconstitutional or unlawful. The IRS immediately removed themselves outside of the jurisdiction and the venue of the courts to the Philippines and Puerto Rico. By deceiving and coercing the population, beginning with the War Tax Act of 1942, the Congress and the IRS continued their unconstitutional and criminal activity to this day. These criminal magicians have convinced the American population that citizens of this nation are of a status that they are not, that they are subjects of the federal government, which they are not collective sovereigns. They led us to believe that we must do things that are not required to be done or go to jail. Through the clever use of IRS speak and the Congress's word art, the executive branch promotes the fraud. The Congress turns a blind eye to their misconducts, but they have hearings that they hope will demonstrate their outrage to the voters. And then their dishonorable courts ratify the alleged criminal misconduct by rubber stamping the convictions of innocent citizens. To illustrate my point on the complicity of the court in this immoral scheme, I refer to a recent case before the Supreme Court the case of United States versus Sandra L. Kraft, case number 00-1831. In hearing on January 14th, 2002, the Assistant Solicitor General, Mr. Kent L. Jones, was asked a question from the court. Question: some penalties for failing to file a return. Answer: there are some penalties, but the penalties, like taxes, have to be enforced against the property of the taxpayer. And if the taxpayer is allowed to exempt all of its property through this fashion, then there's literally no way that the taxes can be enforced through civil procedures. Question: what about criminal procedure? Are there any criminal procedures for failure, continued failure to file? Answer: of course, if you file a return, then you're not exposing yourself to any criminal obligations. And if you don't file a return, it would be, I'm not familiar with a statute that makes that a crime by itself. Now, it may be that it's a crime in connection with some intent to conceal, but just the fact that you didn't file, I'm not ... Even though I come before the court on tax cases, I'm not an expert on criminal tax matters, but it's my impression that would not be by itself a crime. Question: we'd better not let the word get out. I thought it was a crime, but I'll check, followed by laughter. Over 3,000 Americans each year are sent to federal prison for not filing a tax return, and the Assistant Solicitor General, Mr. Kent L. Jones, admits to the Supreme Court that it is not illegal to not file a tax return. The Supreme Court advises him, quote, we'd better not let that word get out, unquote. That supposed bastion in the protection of our freedoms wants to keep it a dirty little secret among the privileged few, and to continue to permit that imprisonment of thousands of innocent people and the resultant destruction of their lives. That is something to laugh about. This is a perfect point in the book to educate you on your proper status as a citizen of one of the Republic States of the Union. What you were taught in public school was exactly what the federal and state governments wanted you to be taught. The most powerful tool of control of any population by the government is ignorance of its subjects. Quote, a sovereign is one in whom supreme power is vested. He may delegate whatever his total authority he wishes. He can consent to whatever outside authority he may choose or none at all. However, he cannot be, quote unquote, subject to outside authority. This would be in contradiction to sovereignty, unquote. Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition. The creation of the enumerated powers in the United States Constitution was done by delegation of authority. The power of the sovereign people remained with the people. The federal government may exercise its enumerated power only on their behalf. This relationship was well stated by the Supreme Court as follows, quote, sovereignty itself is, of course, not subject to law, for it is the author and source of law. But in our system, while sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government, sovereignty itself remains with the people, by whom and for whom all governments exist and acts. Are you a citizen of the United States? Are you a sovereign? Those two questions and their answers hold the secrets of our present-day condition of servitude to the de facto federal and state governments. There have been massive fraudulent practices of the Congress and state legislatures in the creation of legislation or statutes that has regulated our lives and commerce for over 60 years. Without a thorough understanding of your correct relationship to these legal fictions and the statutes they have created, you are doomed to a lifetime of servitude which can be avoided. I pray for more understanding and knowledge, as I do not as yet know the impact or total paradigm of this deception. What I do know is shockingly but enlightening. I will attempt to explain as much as possible, as much is possible, with that limited knowledge of the methods used to obfuscate the law and your citizenship status, effectively placing you in a feudal relationship with government forces. In order for you to take cognizance of the full context of this conspiracy, you need to understand the meaning of words of art used by the various legislative bodies to entrap you. The words used in statutory law do not have the normal, everyday street meaning. By diagramming the statute, it is possible to understand the intent of the law and its application. Get out your old 10th grade English grammar book and learn how to diagram sentences. It will save you a world of grief. Preamble to the United States Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America, unquote. It appears that, quote unquote, we the people of the United States, acting through our representation, were sovereign because we were doing the creating of this constitutional compact. But does that mean that you individually are a sovereign? If King Juan Carlos of Spain were to submit to a kidney transplant and the recipient was a farmer from Ohio, would the farmer become a sovereign king of Spain the moment the kidney was stitched into his body? Of course not. To be King Juan Carlos of Spain, you must be the whole person. You must be a living soul. You must wear a mask of your status. King Carlos would still be a king regardless if he had 2 kidneys or 1. What makes him a king and sovereign is that he was born with the title of sovereign or ruler's mask, nothing more. If he renounced that title, he would not be a sovereign, but would revert to a different class, common man's mask, or subject of a higher authority, that which would replace him. So, being a sovereign requires that someone or some force has declared that you are sovereign and that has given you the authority to exercise all of your powers over your subjects. or citizens. That could be done by God, as royalty claims to rule by divine right, or by being elected to that lofty position by your subjects. Since none of us have been declared by God to be sovereign or elected to the position of sovereign by our fellow man, individually one cannot be sovereign, as many in the patriot community profess. Not only would the declaration that you are sovereign be frivolous to the ears of the courts, it would be a blasphemy to the Lord God of the universe, as he is the only one true sovereign to whom we all owe our allegiance. What you are is a unique species described by God as a living soul. Quote, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." Unquote. Genesis chapter 2, verse 8. That distinction is unique in the United States of America because we all, collectively, as living souls, were given the highest possible status, that of sovereign over the governments we created. The authority for bestowing that authority was, quote, "we the people," unquote. When we act as a whole, then we the people are the sovereign of the United States of America, exercising our power through our elected representatives. When we act as individuals, we are acting in the capacity of living souls, each responsible for ourselves. The court has described this concept as follows. Quote, "A distinction was taken at the bar between a state and the people of the state. It is a distinction I am not capable of comprehending." Pardon me. "By a state forming a republic, speaking of it as a moral person, I do not mean the legislature of the state, the executive of the state, or the judiciary, but all the citizens who compose the state and are, if I may say so myself, if I may so express myself, integral parts of it, altogether forming a body politic. The great distinction between monarchies and republics, at least our republic, in general, is that in the former, the monarch is considered as a sovereign, and each individual of his nation as a subject to him. Though, in some countries, with many important special limitations. This, I say, is generally the case, for it has not been so universal, but in a republic, all the citizens as such are equal, and no citizen can rightfully exercise any authority over another, but in virtue of a power constitutionally given by the whole community. And such authority, when exercised, is, in effect, an act of the whole community, which forms such body politic. In such governments, therefore, the sovereignty resides in the great body of the people, but it resides in them not as so many distinct individuals, but in their political capacity only. Thus, A, B, C, and D are citizens of Pennsylvania, and as such, together with all the citizens of Pennsylvania, share in the sovereignty of the state. Suppose a state to consist exactly had a number of 100,000 citizens, and if it were practical for them all to assemble at one time and in one place, and that 99,999 did actually assemble, the state would not be in fact assembled. Why? Because the state in fact is composed of all the citizens, not of a part only, however large the part may be, and one is wanting, unquote. Penhallow verse Doane, 3 Doll 93. The protections we gave ourselves as living souls and a sovereign body politic were incorporated into the Constitution as the first 10 amendments, which are often referred to as the Bill of Rights. These rights were specifically enumerated because, from our colonial experience, these rights were the most often abused by the king and his agents, and are deemed to be so fundamental that without them, there would be no humanity. The Constitution was written in order to protect the commerce of the independent sovereign states from foreign aggression and equal treatment among the contracting states. The individual living souls of the states that compacted together by the Constitution were protected in their fundamental rights from its creation, the federal government, in the exercise of the enumerated powers that we granted it and nothing more. The Constitution did not create a sovereign government over the member states to the compact over the people of those states. The Congress and the state legislatures are cognizant of the authority delegated them by, quote, we the people, unquote, the sovereign body politic. Under the federal and state constitutions, and are specific when legislating law for the sovereign body politic and for subjects of the federal government. In order to gain control over us, quote, we the people, unquote, they use, quote unquote, word art, and by definitions such as, quote unquote, persons, quote unquote, including, quote unquote, states, etc., they begin stripping away our basic fundamental rights by sophistry. For their success, they depend upon our apathy towards government and the general obscurity of knowledge regarding our status versus the citizen subject of the district. Quote, person. In general usage, a human being, i.e., natural person. Though by statute term may include labor organizations, partnerships, associations, corporations, legal representatives, trustees, trustees in bankruptcy, or receivers. Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition, page 1142. Notice that there are two types of person described: a human being or natural person with natural rights, and artificial entities or legal fictions with legal rights. The significance in our jurisprudence. The word quote unquote person in its primitive and natural sense signifies the mask with which actors who played dramatic pieces in Rome and Greece covered their heads. These pieces were played in public places and afterwards in such vast amphitheaters that it was impossible for a man to make himself heard by all the spectators. Recourse was had to art. Recourse was had to art. That doesn't make any sense. The head of each actor was enveloped with a mask, the figure of which represented the part he was to play. And it was so contrived that the opening for the emission of his voice made the sounds clearer and more resounding. Vox personabat. When the name persona was given to the instrument or mask which facilitated the resounding of his voice, the name persona was afterwards applied to the part itself, which the actor had undertaken to play, because the face of the mask was adapted to the age and character of him who was considered as speaking, and sometimes it was his own portrait. It is in this last sense of speaking, and sometimes it was, I'm sorry about that, it was in his last sense of personage, or the part which an individual plays, that the word persona is employed in jurisprudence, in opposition to the word man or homo. When we speak of a person, we only consider the state of the man, the part he plays in society, abstractly, without considering the individual. As you can see from the definition in Bouvier's, in our jurisprudence, the part the person plays in society, the mask he wears, determines the natural or legal rights he may or may not have, and the jurisdiction of the different courts over his persona. Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution for the United States defines the jurisdictions of the court. They are, quote unquote, law, meaning the common law with all the constitutional protections, equity, admiralty, and maritime, meaning contract law, private international law, with no constitutional protection. The common law has jurisdiction over the natural person or mask by use of Article 3 courts. The remaining jurisdictions have jurisdiction over legal fiction or mask, i.e., non-natural persons. Article 6 courts. Under Article 6 courts, a natural person can change his acting role in business and assume a different mask if he, for instance, enters into a partnership, corporation, or contract. He may still be a living soul, but his status or mask under the Constitution has changed to that of a legal fiction or straw man or corporate mask, and the court's statutory jurisdiction over the straw man is now presumed. Progression of deception. During the early part of the 1800s, up to the time of the war between the states, The power brokers were busy putting together a plan that would increase the political jurisdiction of the United States. This plan was necessary, in their opinion, because the United States had a minimum number of subjects. The ones living in the District of Columbia, and only the land seceded to it by the states. The district was only 10 miles square. Land seceded for the seat of government by Maryland and Virginia, and some land outside the district by other states, and was necessary for forts, magazines, arsenals, and other needful buildings within the member states. So the acquisition of land was also on the agenda. Between the 1860s and the early 1900s, banking and tax mechanisms were changing throughout legislation sponsored by the European central banks. Clever politicians and agents of the central banks of Europe, closely associated with the powers of England, had enormous influence on the legislation being passed in the Congress. It was a responsibility of the people to understand their status with regard to the United States and the legislation being passed by the Congress and for their state legislatures. The largest majority of the legislation did not apply to the states or to the people within the states, but Congress did not deem it their necessary duty to make the distinction as to which law applied to whom. This distinction between the authority and jurisdiction of the United States and that of the states was critical and taught in the home, school, and church. The true status was taught because there was no federal subsidy program for the schools with required subject matter or revisionist history that the government wanted taught, and that no incorporation of the church restricting that could be taught because of a taxes exemption. The teaching of the citizen's status was unobstructed and detailed. They understood the clear line established by this Constitution and the jurisdiction of the government that flowed from the enumerated powers granted to it by that compact. The people were in control of that precise moment because they knew both their standing or mask in relation to the United States and its legislative jurisdiction and that of their state. The federal courts did not interpret legislation as broadly as they do now, because the people knew when the courts were overstepping their jurisdiction by entering into litigation that was reserved for the common law, as admiralty is private international contract law under Article 6 authority. The 14th Amendment added some confusion about the basic understanding of status because it created a new class of citizen, United States citizens that had not existed previously. The newly freed Black citizen knew nothing of the Constitution, let alone jurisdiction of the government over different classes of persons. Prior to its adoption, citizens or persons of the state citizens or persons of state status automatically were deemed citizens of the American Empire. But first and foremost, state citizenship was paramount, and American citizenship flowed from state citizenship. Before the 14th Amendment in 1868, there were no persons born or naturalized in the United States. Naturalization was a state function. Each person had been born or naturalized in one of the several states. Following the Civil War, the new class of citizen was recognized, and this was the beginning of the departure from the Republic and the formation of the United States democracy, whose situs is the District of Columbia. The American people in the Republic cited in the several Republic states could choose the benefit of federal citizenship just as one of the new United States citizens if they chose to do so. Dual system of law created by the 14th Amendment. This chapter will cover the particulars of the dual legal system that has been established by the 14th Amendment to the Constitution for the United States. Its subject matter will encompass a general overview of adverse conditions which affect the freedom and liberty of all Americans. Matters included herein will be in reference to the police power of the state in its relation and application to the citizen, i.e., nationals, members of any given state. Moreover, any such state's relations with other nationals of the American Union. Nationality du jour. To grasp the true understanding of the United States of America's governmental system in the original premise, one must imagine that the government of the Federation, the United States, does not exist. In such case, each state in the Union would be a separate country accordingly. Under the rules of international law, a sovereign state is a nation, much as is the European continent at present. State in all caps. A people permanently occupying a fixed territory bound together by common law habits and custom into one body politic exercising through the medium of an organized government, independent sovereignty, and control over all persons and things within its boundaries, capable of making war and peace and of entering into international relations with other communities of the globe. Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition. Nation in all caps. Nations or states are independent bodies politic, societies of men united together for the purpose of promoting their mutual safety and advantage by the joint efforts of their combined strengths. Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1856. The foregoing is the international definition of state and nation. Now, adding the federal government back into the equation, the Constitution for the United States of America is nothing more than an international agreement or compact or charter between the several republics of America and the respective nations. Accordingly, in the forming of the American Federation, each state of the Union gave up some of their inherent rights of statehood that they possessed under the general rules of international law. However, one such right that they did not give up is the maintenance of their respective and individual nations. This is further found exemplified in the protection provisions that are set forth by the 9th and 10th Amendments in the Bill of Rights of the Federal Constitution. To further expand on these premises, a citizen, member of any particular nation, carries the quality of that nationality. Nationality in all caps. The state of a person in relation to the nation in which he was born. A man retains his nationality of origin during his minority, but as in the case of his domicile of origin, he may change his nationality upon attaining full age. He cannot, however, renounce his allegiance without permission of the government. Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1856. In reference to domicile, such as in direct relations to one's presence in a country. In reference to one's allegiance, such is to the nation or state of origin or his membership thereof. In further reference of nationality and allegiance that is inherent to our system of law, one has always been able to change his nationality within the Union. Such terms below encompass this legal issue. Country is in all caps. By country is meant the state of which one is a member. Every man's country is in general the state in which he happens to have been born. Expatriation, the voluntary act of abandoning one's country and becoming the citizen and national or subject of another. Naturalization, the conferring of the nationality of a state upon a person after birth by any means whatsoever. Unknown to most Americans, such matter of natural right is available. However, for political reasons, it has been kept a secret, which will be briefly discussed in the next few parts. In conclusion, in a clear sense, all such qualities make up the international and constitutional de jure premise of the Union. That is to say, each state is clearly a nation by right. Accordingly, the United States of America is in a purely legal sense, is based on the law of nations or natural law, is not a state, nation, or country. Hence, one cannot have the nationality of such. To truly manifest nationality, land is required. The United States does or did not possess land to support premise of nationality. Hence, the United States, the quote-unquote United States, is not a state or a nation in regards to its composite stature as the government of the unions. The quote-unquote United States, in simple sense, is a corporate body, a quote-unquote corporate body, that has been contracted by the several American nations to handle certain affairs. 14th Amendment. It is common knowledge that after the American Civil War, the Union went through some dramatic changes. Among these changes was a dominant makeover of the Union's constitutional system. Such changes included amendments to the federal Constitution, which are commonly known as the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th. As the people of America have been taught, they believe that these amendments were for the purpose of administrating civil rights to the slaves. All such amendments have served such purpose. However, such measures have eroded the civil law of America, the common law. Consequently, over the past 130 years, such civil law has been destroyed and has been tacitly transferred to the police power of the federal and state governments. This has been implicitly accomplished by Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, of and through which such legal operations is set forth. Quote, all persons born or nationalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside, unquote. In legal operation, it naturalizes everyone born in America to be federal citizens at birth. This clause is referred to as the quote-unquote naturalization clause. However, each citizenship is voluntary. It must be established that the 14th Amendment citizenship develops a character that is sometimes somewhat repugnant to natural and international law. In fact, said amendment introduced a commercial-based constitutional system of law. That is to say, everything that is encompassed in the government de facto system is of a contractual nature, which imports the creation of a legal fiction and creates several conflicts of law. Another repugnant factor that coexists with this de facto citizenship is the imposition of an unnatural allegiance to the United States, in quotes. Accordingly, Americans do not realize that they have given up their liberties by not expressly terminating the de facto citizenship at their age of majority. Moreover, they further consent in a tactily made commercial style agreement to the induced constitutional system and unnatural franchise citizenship by voting pursuant to Section 2 of Amendment X1V.
We don't know any better though, because we're not told there's a difference. You know what I mean?
Right.
All this stuff is, entrained in us throughout grade school.
Yeah. Well, you only
like,
know
hey, grow up to be a good citizen of the United States, but we have no idea what it really means. Nobody's ever stopped to think about it. Like, hey, what does it really mean to be a citizen of the United States?
Exactly.
And does everyone even know what the United States is? Why is it called so many different things? Why do we have the United States? Or, why is it called America or the United States of America? Why so many different names? But each one of those names is very specific.
Yes, it is.
That's all I wanted to pop in and say. You're doing.
Pardon me?
I said, that's all I wanted to pop in and say, just that we, we're so brainwashed from the time we're little kids that we don't realize, what we're doing. We think it's part of our civic duty or whatever.
Yep.
To be good little citizens.
Yep.
We have no idea that it's all in commerce and that, it's a foreign corporation and all that. We have no idea until we start digging into it. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. Comfortably, said section of the amendment further establishes the quote unquote new appointment, or I'm sorry, apportionment of federal representation amongst the states of the Union, and also sets up the new, or rather alternate, state governments, which, as a matter of law, are de facto or insurgent. The law that is established under the 14th Amendment is private international law. Hence, the states and federal government represent only voting federal citizens as set forth by the legal operation of Section 2 of the Amendment X1V, 16th. Consequently, this is where the dual system of law is set forth. Number one, the private law that is caused by the 14th Amendment. And number two, the public law that is inherent in the original form of the constitutional system, which includes the public law of each state encompassed in their respective constitutions, and the public law that is set forth by the original form of the Constitution for the United States of America. To further illustrate the establishment of the dual system of law, we must review what has truly transpired in relation to Section 2 of the 14th Amendment. Based on the rules that are set forth and established by the law of nations and the alternate 13th Amendment, one cannot be subordinate to the domination of another without his consent. Hence, by using syntax, or rather by applying sentence structure to sentence 2 of the 14th Amendment, you will find the following relevant wording set forth in, quote, word art, unquote. The right to vote is denied except for participation in rebellion or other crime. In essence, what this accomplishes is an unwitting contractual agreement by a native, now naturalized citizen of the United States or federal citizen to unwittingly give up his de jure law form and accept the de facto law form, which is in essence the police power of the federal and state legislatures, i.e. voluntary servitude, such as established by the diabolical 14th Amendment system. In reference to said system, in simple terms, the state legislatures are acting in a quasi-war mode due to the induced voting rebellion, i.e. police state. A U.S. citizen is in breach of allegiance to his native state by tactily and unwittingly declaring that he accepts the alternate government system. Statutory law, state and federal, then controls him over his de jure law form, which is the common law. All such citizens within the jurisdiction of the corporate United States are considered belligerents along with the nationals that run the de facto state governments. In the rudimentary form of this constitutional system of the Union, the legislatures could not create law that affected citizens at large or individual state citizens. Hence, some of the law established by the statutory scheme is pursuant to international rules of war. As the law has been applied and is fundamentally being followed, the general constitutional provisions that have been craftily utilized to create this quote-unquote silent hostility can be found in the body of the original Constitution in Article 6, Section 4. The United States shall protect each of the several states against invasion and on application of the legislature or of the executive against domestic violence. In fact, this establishes a system of law that is based on maritime principles. Unknown to Americans, all courts of the United States, state and federal, are being operated under the principles of such law. Hence, note that all courts in the United States of America display military flags, regular flags with gold fringe. Civil flags are hung vertically and never on a pole. Accordingly, the states or governments are acting in a quasi de jure capacity and asserting their sovereignty over their citizens de facto. Voting Americans, or as they also have accepted this system, all United States citizens have voluntarily been induced to unwittingly, number one, become enemies of the state, number two, become residents of their state, hence not true nationals under the law of nationals, number three, accept a feudal system of law and land ownership, and thus, number four, give up their natural rights to sovereignty that is protected by the state constitution and the laws of nation and the law of nations. Although the American governmental system is de facto, the de jure system of law, along with its several nationalities, is preserved. This is evident as nothing in the original federal Constitution has been repealed. Thus, it is still in full force and effect. Under the rule of international law, the de facto governmental system cannot be forced on people of America that do not wish to participate in it. Thus, the de facto statutory constitution can be applied only to consenting U.S. citizens, even if it is unwillingly so. Hence, it is not mandatory for, thus cannot be forced on, those state citizens who wish not to rebel against their de jure law to partake in the insurgent system. Federalism versus nationalism. In planned effect, these matters have created a legal, or rather included political phenomenon, federalism. The antithesis of federalism is nationalism. To give a general background of the reasoning behind the two terms, the founding fathers, such as Thomas Jefferson, were concerned with the Federalists' ulterior motives. Jefferson sensed that the Federalists were primarily interested in turning America into one big commercial plantation under their rule. The Constitution reflects the general concerns of Jefferson. The document's predominant Commerce Clause makes obvious its commercial purpose. Accordingly, if one would observe the political scheme that evolved in America, we would establish that in the early 1800s, Jefferson ultimately overthrew the Federalist Party with his Democratic Republican Party. This took the Union out of the control of the elite, or Federalists, and put it under the control of the American people. Soon after its establishment, the party split into two parties. The two parties are still in existence today. They are known as the Republicans and the Democrats, the same snake with two heads. These two parties, unbeknownst to most Americans, are acting secretly as the Federalists. Our real system of American law allowed too much freedom. On a mass basis, people could not be controlled to direct their own labors towards the goals of the elite. Instead, the current feudal system was induced unwittingly via the voluntary system put into place by the 14th Amendment. To keep matters under their personal control of the Federalists or the elites, socialism was introduced. Karl Marx, drafter of the Communist Manifesto in 1848, said, quote, "Socialism leads to communism," unquote. To implement socialism on a union-wide basis, the 14th Amendment was enrolled via force of the Civil War. The general purpose of such obvious yet covert measures were to tame and train the masses to become a commercialistic economic slave force whereby the elites would profit. Communism is nothing more than another name for federalism. It is basically a system that controls many nations centrally with the aim of commercialism. Accordingly, if one would investigate, all 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto are applied in American law. Remedy of natural right and protections. When societies, which are small local communities, are not allowed to govern themselves through their customs under the rule of natural law, they become prone to social breakdown. Many would agree that American society has seen a total breakdown. This is largely due to the combining of states or nations to act as one under the dictatorial control of the federal government. If America is to repair its apparent social degeneration, the police power of the states has to be negated, and the civil common law has to be restored to the people or nations of America. As the real intent of the 14th Amendment took well over a century to accomplish, we can find that the Congress passed law found codified in Title 8 USC 1401 that made America one nationality. The following shall be nationals of the citizens of the United States at birth: a person born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Such is the language from the 14th Amendment. Fortunately, as this politically imposed nationality is a fraud, a remedy is provided pursuant to international law. Under Title 8 of the United States Code, Section 1481, the de facto federal nationality can be legally terminated. This returns one to his original status under the principles of the original constitutional system. Then, under de jure constitutional premise, interference by the United States is protected by the 9th and 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights of the Federal Constitution. Such is exemplified in the following legal definitions found in Black's Law, 6th edition. Constitutional liberty or freedom. Such freedom as is enjoyed by the citizens of a country or state under the protection of its constitution, the aggregate of those personal, civil, and political rights of the individual, which are guaranteed by the Constitution and secured against invasion by the governments or any of its agencies. Constitutional right. A right guaranteed to the citizens by the United States Constitution and state constitutions, and so guaranteed as to prevent legislative interference therewith. Once one corrects his status, he is no longer under the jurisdiction of the police power of the federal or state governments. One is then an alien as to the de facto political system, i.e., nation or body politic. Moreover, one is also an alien in every state wherein he is not a national. This plays an important part in reference to the United States Code, in reference to protections and remedies. Accordingly, as one is no longer in breach of allegiance to his state government, when his state is corrected, he is protected from its unlawful actions. Such unlawful actions are called actions done under color of law. The term color of law is another way of saying private law, or the law created under the police power of the state legislature, as it is not the common law or customs and usage, i.e. customs and usage. Under the 14th Amendment system, de jure nationals, or a ward in sense, are protected from such actions by the federal government. Title 18, USCA, subsection 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law, criminal in part. Quote, whoever, under color of any law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom, willfully subjects any person in any state, territory, or district to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured or protected by the Constitution or laws of the United States, or to different punishments, pains, or penalties on accounts of such persons being an alien, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. Note that a person has to be an alien to be protected from actions done under the color of law. This means that if a state employee or officer violates your natural rights that are secured by the federal and or state constitutions, he can be put in jail. Moreover, the state itself is not immune from such actions. They can be sued for their employees, officers, and their own actions. As the states are not paying their debts pursuant to money based on substance as largely caused by the socialist system of government, the United States is bankrupt and has been since 1933. All activity that they are involved in is fundamentally commercially based, such as their money systems, traffic citations, taxes, etc. Accordingly, it has been held that the state governments are not immune from their commercial activities against lawful Americans. As the de facto law system fundamentally sets up a system that is based on commercial law, the states are liable for all damages that are done to a person that is not willfully participating in the de facto political system. The state governments are basically quasi-political subdivisions of the federal government, as they are composed of quote-unquote rebelling Americans in treason. The state governments cannot violate the natural rights of a non-participatory American. If any such governments do violate anyone's rights thereof, they and their employees will be held liable for their actions. Americans' problems will not see any correction until either a peaceful or violent revolution is created or is ceased and the original system put back in place. Until then, America must enforce their natural rights that are held under the laws of nations and claim their true nationalities. It is the obligation of every American to enforce this right and make others aware of the hidden agenda that has been inflicted on us, which agenda is purely that of a commercial interest held by the world elites. In 1865, the 13th Amendment opened the floodgate for the people to volunteer into servitude in order to accept the benefits offered by the United States. The 13th Amendment prohibits involuntary servitude. It does not prohibit voluntary servitude. In 1870, the 15th Amendment gave the new class of In 1870, the 15th Amendment gave that new class of citizens the right to vote in that democracy. Benefits came with this new citizenship, but with the benefits also came duties, liabilities, and responsibilities that were totally regulated by the Congress for the District of Columbia and its subjects only. In 1913, the United States began using international private law, admiralty law, because that's facilitated an increase of quote-unquote persons and property for the United States, giving the district courts booty and prize jurisdiction over enemy property within the confines of the American Republic. Subject persons and property having the same status. Admiralty is a form of military law, and jurisdiction is based upon contract. The adhesion contracts between the state citizen and the federal government began to grow. This increase in subject citizen population became the cornerstone for the strategy of expansion, and now the federal government had many subjects because of the benefit derived from the contracts. Federal Admiralty jurisdiction was proper because the former living soul or mask was replaced with a legal fiction person or mask voluntarily by contract. Central banking for the United States was legislated into existence by the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment in 1913. It gave the central bankers all of the support they needed to finance their fiat money scheme. In 1917, the United States entered World War I, and the Congress passed the Trading with the Enemy Act and the Emergency War Powers Act, opening the doors for the United States to suspend constitutional restrictions otherwise mandated by the Constitution. Even in times of peace, every contrived, created social, political, or financial emergency was sufficient authority for the officers of the United States to overstep its peacetime power and implement volumes of quote-unquote law that would increase the wealth of the United States at the expense of the quote-unquote persons or mask who were now duty-bound to support it. All of the agencies that were created temporarily in time of war were not dismantled after the war, so the federal government got larger. And War Powers Act of 1917 was terminated after the war, but the agencies and departments created for that purpose still remain. There is always a declared emergency in the United States and its states since the resurrection of the War Powers Act of 1933. But when the statute is read carefully, it applies only to their 14th Amendment subject citizens. This is the main reason for obscuring the facts that there are two different classes of persons within the American Empire, as well as two distinct United States. If you are not taught the facts in school, how else will you learn? The statutory construction appears with crystal clarity when we consider the language used by the Supreme Court to describe the different definitions of the United States. Quote, this term has several meanings. It may be merely, one, the name of the sovereign occupying the position analogous and
Analogous.
Let me start over. The name of the sovereign occupying the position analogous to that of other sovereigns in the family of nations. Two, it may designate territory over which sovereignty of the United States extends. Or three, it may be the collective name of the states which are united by and under the Constitution. Unquote. Thus, in Hooven, that was Hooven verse Allison, co-verse Evett. Thus, in Hooven, it is readily discernible that there are two literal United States, consisting of definitive landmasses or geographical areas. The third definition, 3, in Hooven, consists of the 50 states united under the Constitution. The second definition designates the geographical area consisting of the District of Columbia and all the territory over which designates the geographical area consisting of the District of Columbia and all territory over which the political sovereignty of the all caps United States extends. Congress expresses the sovereignty of this second all caps United States under authority of Article 1, subsection 8, clause 17 and 18, and Article 4, subsection 3, clause 2 of the Constitution, with no constitutional restriction in place on said plenary powers. Congress, in legislating for the district and its territories, always defines the word quote unquote state and quote unquote United States in its public laws to only include such geographical areas. Colonel Edward Mandell House, who was the agent provocateur of Rothschilds, the head of the European Central Banks, was assigned to oversee the president of and the Congress in the implementation of the central bankers' plans. House is attributed with giving directions and strategy to be implemented by the president and the senators to enslave the American people with the passage of the Federal Reserve Act and Amendments 16 and 17. Support for the legal presumptions that the American people had volunteered to participate in the United States democracy was legislated with the 17th Amendment in 1913, in that participation in federal elections for U.S. Senator established the legal presumption necessary in determining that you were a federal citizen. The scheme also provided for the control of the courts via the 1913 creation of the American Bar Association, whose parent organization was the European International Bar Association, which was the creation of Rothschild. This allowed international bankers to control the practices of law, in that the only ones permitted to practice before the courts were those who were educated under their brand of law, which was only admiralty and contract law. Common law of the people was to be replaced, as it gave the natural man and was to be replaced as it gave the natural man many jurisdictional protections from the bankers' legislation. When the Congress made its first attempt to throw out the common law and replace it with admiralty law, the Supreme Court rejected the proposed rules of court, explaining that the proposed rules would bring into existence a national police state. So, Roosevelt stacked the High Court and waited for a case upon which the demise of the common law would be accomplished. Erie versus Tompkins came along in 1938 and gave the courts the opportunity the Constitution did not. Therefore, common law at the federal level was to be no more. In 1930, the 1930s were an eat, drink, and be merry time, with the majority of the populations living the good life, with no care in the world and no attention to what was happening in Congress. The stock markets crashed, and those who not on the inside were not warned to take their money out of the markets, and as a result lost everything. This set the stage for socialism and Roosevelt's New Deal. It was a New Deal, all right, a one-sided deal, as you are about to learn. Contract law is above the Constitution and under the jurisdiction of equity admiralty courts. So the governments began to contract with everyone. The 1930s saw federal legislation providing for the registrations of babies through the application of birth certificates. Government workers could get mandatory leave with pay. The states pushed for registration of cars through application for the states pushed for registration of cars through application for certificates of title and for registrations of land through registration of deeds of trust. Constructive trusts were created secretly by adhesion contracts, giving benefits either present or future, and as a result, each of these people blindly walked into the trap of the United States democracy and its jurisdiction by the signing of contracts, thereby agreeing to be sureties for the debt of the United States and collateral for the Federal Reserve Bank Incorporated. The Great Depression supplied the diversion needed to keep people's attention away from what the government was doing. The Social Security program was implemented along with numerous other socialist New Deal programs that invited the American people to volunteer to be sureties behind the United States new registry program and adhesion contracts through the legal presumption that they were 14th Amendment United States subjects. We are permitted to contract with anyone, even the government. So, for the promise of benefits from the federal government, we traded away our unalienable rights and put on a mask of the subject person. Massive registration of property through United States agencies, including the States of the Union, as instrumentalities of the federal government in bankruptcy, assured the United States and its officers and instrumentalities, the states, that they would become wealthy beyond their wildest expectations, as predicted by Colonel House. Edward Mandell House had this to say in a private meeting with Woodrow Wilson, president from 1913 to 1921. From the private papers of Woodrow Wilson, quote, "Very soon, every American will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people and that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. By such methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda, which will affect our security as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency. Every American will be forced to register or suffer not being able to work and earn a living. They will be our chattel, and we will hold the security interest over them forever by operations of the law merchant under the scheme of secured transactions. Americans, by unknowingly or unwittingly delivering the bills of lading to us, will be rendered bankrupt and insolvent, forever to remain economic slaves through taxation secured by their pledges. They will be stripped of their rights and given a commercial value designed to make us a profit, and they will be none the wiser, for not one man in a million could ever figure out our plans, and if by accident one or two would figure it out, we would have in our arsenal plausible deniability. After all, this is the only logical way to fund government, by floating aliens and debt to the registrants in the form of benefits and privileges. This will inevitably reap to us huge profits beyond our wildest expectations and levy every American a contributor or to this fraud, which he will call social insurance. Without realizing it, every American will insure us for any loss we may incur, and in this manner, every American will unknowingly be our servant, however begrudgingly. The people will become helpless and without any hope for their redemption, and will employ the high office of the president and our dummy corporations to foment this plot against America. All of this was done without disclosure of the material facts All of this was done without disclosure of the material facts that accompanied each application for contract registration. That fraud would have been sufficient reason to charge all of the United States officers and elected officials with treason, unless a legal remedy could be legislated for the people to recoup their property and collect for the damages they suffered as a result of the fraud, if ever discovered. If a legal remedy was available and the people chose not to or failed to secure their remedy, no charge of fraud could be brought, even to a common law court. The United States Congress needed only to provide the legal remedy. It was not required to explain it or even to tell the people where the remedy could be found. If they did that, then the entire conspiracy would be revealed and every cherry tree in Washington would be decorated with hanging bodies of congressmen and bankers. The attorneys did not even have to be taught about the remedy in law school. Remaining quiet, Congress had plausible deniability if the people discovered their deception. The majority of the legislators did not have to have the intricate details of the law explained to them regarding the bills they were passing. The pressure was on by the leadership to pass the legislation. And that was all they needed to know. If the people failed to exercise due diligence, the United States became the holder in trust of all the land and labor of every subject in the United Empire. If, however, the people did discover their legal remedy, the United States would have to honor it and release the registered property back to the people, but only if the people were cognizant and that they had a remedy, or cognizant that they had a remedy, and only if they knew, and only if they exercised it in proper technical manner. It was a great plan, and it had worked for over 70 years. Having established plausible deniability, even if the people became enlightened that they had a remedy and pursued it, the attorneys, judges, and legislators could claim that they did not understand it, and the people's claims, especially if the technical requirements for achieving it were not followed pursuant to the statutory requirements. Requiring the public schools to teach civics, government, and history classes out of federally approved politically correct textbooks written by the publishing houses owned by the owners of the Federal Reserve would assure that the people would not discover the remedy for a long time, if ever. Passing state and federal statutes that subjugated the citizens to rules and regulations added another firewall of protection against the people ever discovering the remedy. The media, owned by the same people who own the Federal Reserve, was fashioned to report politically correct news day after day ad nausea until few people believed there was any hope for relief from the system and totally forgot all about their previous history of liberty and freedom. If the people could be separated from their money and their time in pursuit of the remedy, it could be obscured long enough so that the solutions could be lost in millions of law library books across the country, and equitable estoppel by laches could be argued against the few who discovered it. The majority of elder Americans knew there is something terribly wrong with all the conflicts in the law and the facts that they were taught in schools. Not so with the newer generations. How can the American people be free and subject to a government's fancy at that same time? In 1933, the United States established insurance policy with HJR 192, House Joint Resolution 192, and recorded it in the Congressional Record. The Federal Register publication of that law was not required at that time. An executive order issued on April 5th, 1933, paved the way for the withdrawal of all gold in the United States. Representative Louis T. McFadden brought formal criminal charges on May 23, 1933, against the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve Bank System, the Comptroller of the Currency, and the Secretary of the United States Treasury. Congressional Record, May 23, 1933, page 4055 through 4058. Those charges are still not acted upon and are still in committee. HJR 192 passed on June 3rd, 1933. Mr. McFadden claimed on June 10th, 1933, Mr. Chairman, we have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. HJR 192 is the insurance policy that protects the legislators from conviction for fraud and treason against the American people. It also protects the American people from damages caused by the actions of the United States. HJR 192 provides that the one with the gold paid the bills. It removed requirement that the United States subjects and employees had to pay all their debts with gold. It actually prohibited the inclusion of any clause in all subsequent contracts that would require payment in gold. It also canceled the clause in every contract written prior to June 5th, 1933, that required an obligation to be paid in gold. It provided that the United States subjects and employees could use any type of coin and currency to discharge a public debt as long as it was in the use of a normal course of business in the United States. For a time, United States notes were the currency used to discharge debts because there was 40% gold and 60% treasury guarantees behind the currency. But later the Federal Reserve and the United States provided a new medium of exchange through paper notes and debt instruments that could be passed on to the debtor's creditor to tender the debtor's debts. Tender and payments are not the same. Tender merely changes the legal character of that debt, where gold and silver would extinguish the debt. In the 1950s, the Uniform Commercial Code was adopted in most of the states as a means of unifying the generally accepted procedures for handling the new legal system of dealing with commercial fictions as though they were real. Security instruments replaced substance as collateral for debts. Securities instruments could be supported by presumptive adhesion contracts. Debt instruments with collateral and accommodating parties could be used instead of money. Money and the need for money was disappearing, and the uniform system of law had to be put in place to allow the courts to uphold the securities instruments that depended on commercial fictions as a basis for compelling payment or performance. All this was accomplished by the mid-1960s. The Commercial Code is merely a codification of accepted and required procedures which all people engaged in commercial activity must follow. The basic principles of commerce had been settled thousands of years ago, but were refined as commerce became more sophisticated over the years. In the 1900s, the age-old principles of commerce shifted from substance to form. Presumption became a major element of the law. Without giving a degree of force to legal presumption, the new direction is enforcing commercial claims could not be supported in equity or admiralty courts and had no chance in common law. If the claimants were required to produce their claims every time they tried to collect from the people, they would seldom be successful. The principles articulated in the Commercial Code combine the methods of dealing with substantive commercial activity with presumptive commercial activity. These principles worked as well for us as they do it for the entrenched powers. The rules are neutral and respect neither sides of a dispute, as they are ancient in origin. The entrenched powers that engineered the scheme for the people to register their property and persons with the United States and its instrumentalities gained control of the people's property and right to property through registration and licensing. The United States became the trustees of the titles to everything. The definition of quote-unquote property is the interest one has in a thing. The thing is the principle. The property is the interest in the thing. Profits or interest made from the property of another belong as surety, belong to the owner of the thing. The international bankers made profits by pledging as surety the registered property of the people in commercial markets. But the profits do not belong to the bankers. The profits belong to the owners of the thing. That is always the people. The corporation government shows only ownership of paper, titles to things. The substance cannot appear in the fiction. Sometimes the fiction is manufactured to appear as substance, but fiction can never become substance. It is an illusion. This is why the proper spelling of your name in upper and lower case is never used in court documents. The all caps spelling represents the legal fiction, which the government holds title to and jurisdiction over, as it is the creation of the government. The substance cannot appear in the fiction. What will happen when you appear and claim the name ascribed on the complaint? You and the fiction become one and the same. You have changed masks from a natural person to an artificial one. The profits from the registered property had to be put into trust for the benefits of the owners. If the profits were put into the general fund of the United States and not into separate trusts for the owners, the scheme would evidence fraud. The profits for each owner could not be commingled. If the owner failed to use his available remedy, fictional credits held in constructive trust account, fund, or financial ledger to benefit. If the owner failed to use his available remedy or fictional credits held in a constructive trust account, fund, or hedge ledger or financial ledger to benefit from the profits, it would not be the fault of the governments or their banking co-conspirators. If the owner failed to learn the law that would open the door to his remedy, it would not be the fault of the swindlers. The owner is responsible for learning the law so that he understands the profits from his prosperity are available for him to discharge debts or charges brought against his legal fiction person by the United States or other commercial entities. If the United States has the quote-unquote gold, the United States pays the bills from the trust account, fund, or financial ledger. The definition of quote-unquote fund is money set aside to pay a debt. The fund is there to discharge the public debts attributed to the United States subjects, but ultimately back to the accommodating parties, the American people. The national debt is that which is due to the owners of the registered things, the American people, as well as to the other creditors. If the United States owes a debt to the owner of the thing, and the owner is presumed by accommodation to owe a public debt to the United States, the logical thing is to ask the United States to discharge that public debt from the trust fund. The way for the United States to get around having to pay the public debt for the people is to claim the owner cannot be an owner if he agreed to be the accommodating party of a debtor person. If the people are truly the principal, then they know how to handle their financial and political affairs, unless they have never been taught. If the owner admits by his actions of ignorance that he is an accommodating party, he has taken on the debtor's liabilities without getting consideration in exchange. Here lies that fiction again. And with that, I'm going to cut it off right there, because we're coming on the closing of this podcast.
Very good reading.
Yeah. My
it's just amazing how much
sleepy.
Probably ready to pop out of your head at this point.
Yeah, I was having to close one eye.
Yeah, I can read for 2 hours, but I don't know if I can read for 2 hours out loud. That's completely different. Reading to yourself and reading out loud. Two different things there.
Yep.
Yeah, that's some good, meaty, juicy info in that book. I'm going to have to get my hands on a copy of that. It's a very interesting book.
Well, at the end of the first chapter, I didn't want to. I think I might read it. It's his citizenship repudiation documents.
Okay.
And it's about, I don't know, 8 pages long.
Well, it's good that he published it in the book. Does he lay out like a step-by-step process that he used?
Yes.
To expatriate, rescind his citizenship?
Yes.
Yeah, I would be interested in looking that over.
Yeah, I love the book. I learned a lot from it. It reminded me of the oh my gosh, what was that? It's on my blog. It was a book I read many years ago about the difference between being sovereign and being citizen.
Right, because a sovereign is one who has subjects.
Yes.
You know, how can you be a sovereign if you don't have any subjects?
Exactly.
I don't really particularly like the word sovereign. I surely don't like it when it's put together with citizen. Sovereign citizen, that's an oxymoron.
Yeah, that's the CIA did that.
That's the label that, you know, they're so quick to put on anybody that, you know, dabbles in this type of information. Oh, you're a sovereign citizen. No, you just show your ignorance when you say something like that. Because that just shows that you haven't bothered to look into it at all, and you just repeat what you hear from, you know, mainstream media and government websites.
Right. Yeah. Well,
because a lot of sheriff's departments have put out videos, you know, supposed to be training their officers for how to deal with, you know, quote unquote sovereign citizens.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people out there that
they just don't know any better.
That don't know what they're doing. They don't. They don't know any better, and they go off half-cocked and start, you know, trying to spit some knowledge or, you know, claim their rights, and they end up making themselves look like an idiot in the process.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do anything good for the movement as a whole.
Yeah.
When people go out there unprepared and, you know, try to cite some information that's not correct, it makes themselves look bad and makes everybody else look bad as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been trying to get Pam Jones on my channel. She's been very busy setting up her war room, and she has assured me over and over that she intends to join us on one of our podcasts, or maybe even more. She might be a reappearing guest. I don't know. Anyway, I'm.
Did
really
you ever hear
excited
anything back from Deborah Tavares?
Pardon me?
Did you hear back from Deborah Tavares? Have you heard anything back from her?
No, I have not. I haven't heard back from Anthony Patch
What
either.
about Anthony Patch? Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah. But
all those people are really busy, so
yeah, there's a lot going on in the world.
It might be hard. It might be hard to get them on short notice. Something like that. We may need to try to schedule and book it, months in advance.
Yeah.
Because they have pretty tied up schedules. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that reading. If Pam Jones decides that she's going to join us next Monday, then I won't read from this book, but I will keep reading from this book until I don't have any more to read from that book.
Until we finish it. How many chapters is that book?
Pardon me?
How many chapters is that book? How long is it?
It is about 250 pages long.
Okay, so what, 10, 12 chapters?
Yeah.
Something like that.
I'm going to start reading Trance Formation of America, but I'm going to create that in a video style reading. I'm not going to be live streaming this, only because there are images and pictures that will give it a better effect.
Go along with it.
Yes.
Right. Part of the presentation.
Yes.
All right.
So,
sounds good.
I'm finishing up my Vegas video, and once that's finished, that's going to free up a lot of my time, and I will be able to do these little endeavors. So
I look forward to that video.
yeah, everybody is. I am like, I think I'm probably going to start rendering it this week. So knock on pretend wood that I get it rendered this week. So, and it's going to take it'll take at least 1 week, if not 2 weeks, to render.
Well, let me know as soon as it's finished so I can check it out.
Oh, believe me, I will. Everybody will know. Everybody will know. Okay, everybody.
All right. Sounds good. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Yep. Hit that subscribe button. Smash the notification bell.
Like, share, subscribe.
Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I will see you all next week.